Welcome everyone to the Friday edition of our Packers News live chat. Alongside Tom Silverstein, I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers hit the field for the final time this week, gearing up for their game this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles. We will get to some of the interesting injury updates, and we'll also take a look at a key matchup, the Packers offensive line versus the Eagles defensive line, in just a moment. Before we get into that, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the comments. Tom and I want to hear from you. We will get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. The Packers are going to roll out their sixth starting offensive line combination this upcoming Sunday. Center Corey Linsley is expected to miss 2 to 6 weeks with a sprained MCL in his left leg. He will not be playing in the game on Sunday. Last time that the Packers played, when Linsley came out against the Bears, what happened was left guard Elgton Jenkins slid over to center, and then John Runyon Jr. came in at left guard. He replaced Jenkins. That was what they rolled with through the rest of the game when Linsley came out. Head coach Matt LaFleur did not confirm that was going to be the same situation heading into this Sunday. However, how likely is it that Runyon and Jenkins get the nod to start this weekend?
Yeah, I think you can, bet the house on it. That's how they'll go. It was quite successful against the Bears. It worked out just fine. Elgton Jenkins, I've said it a million times on here, I still think center is his best position, and I think that's where he's going to be playing next year. So they're good there. The one thing to keep an eye on is Lucas Patrick. He's got this toe injury, and he's gutting it out, and those things are painful. And he didn't make it through the game last week, and who knows? If I'm Rick Wagner, I'd be prepared to play, because what they did was move Billy Turner to right guard and bring in Rick Wagner to play right tackle when Patrick got hurt. So they definitely got to be ready that way, and possibly have someone else ready to play guard.
Eagles defensive tackle Fletcher Cox is also expected to play this upcoming Sunday, as he's been dealing with a neck injury this whole entire week. He is the second highest ranked defensive player on Pro Football Focus, second to only defensive end Brandon Graham. The two of them combined this season have 12.5 sacks. They mostly line up on the left side of the formation, so that means that the right side of the offensive line, right guard Lucas Patrick and right tackle Billy Turner, are going to be expected to handle both of them. How prepared are Turner and Patrick to handle Cox and Graham?
I don't think it's a complete mismatch. I don't think it's maybe like the old days when they play a really talented defensive line and they would just have a weakness somewhere. As long as Patrick can move, he's had a really good year. I think he's been really solid. Now, Fletcher Cox is going to cause problems as long as he's healthy. And, they took the injury status off him, so I'm assuming he's close to 100%. He's going to cause problems no matter what. And I think it's going to be a great battle with Elgton Jenkins probably doubling him almost all day long. They have to do that. And then the Packers rely on their tackles. They're really confident in David Bakhtiari and Billy Turner, and they're going to let them have their share of one-on-one blocks with Brandon Graham and Sweat and Barnett and whoever. The Eagles just keep sending guys out there at you, and but LaFleur is very confident in those guys.
In more Eagles injury news, tight end Zach Ertz is also expected to play this upcoming weekend after sitting on injured reserve for 6 weeks with an ankle injury. He hasn't had a very productive season on the Eagles. In 6 games when he was healthy before going on injured reserve, he only had a single touchdown. However, last season against the Packers, Ertz had a pretty productive day. He had 7 receptions for 65 yards. How challenging will Ertz be, even though he is coming off of an injury?
I think a lot of people want to know what he's going to look like and whether he's really going to play for sure. I know he's been practicing and he's active, so I expect him to play, but I also expect them to use a decent amount of Dallas Goedert too. 2 big tight ends that can get down the field, and they can cause some problems. They can be take over as like big wide receivers. And so Ertz, if he's near healthy, he's going to cause a little bit of issues from them. The Packers have struggled with tight ends, really good pass catching tight ends. Patton, one way he can do it is be really aggressive with his rush and make the Eagles keep a tight end in and block. So we'll see. I am kind of interested to see what kind of shape Ertz is in. He's a good player when he's healthy.
Flipping it back over to the Packers, running back and return specialist Tyler Ervin is also expected, although questionable, to play on Sunday as he's missed the last 2 games with a ribs injury. Ervin has gotten a more increased role in the Packers offense in his second year under head coach Matt LaFleur. However, he's kind of fizzled out a little bit in the return game. This season, he's averaged 5 yards per punt return and 17.6 yards per kick return. That is down from last season. The Packers signed wide receiver Tavon Austin earlier this week, and he has some experience fielding punt returns. How likely is it that Austin gets a shot in the return game, even if Ervin is healthy enough to play?
So I think it's going to depend on what Austin's contribution on offense, whether they have some packages for him. Because if they don't, I don't think they would keep him up just to field punts. I mean, they've got Ervin. I would think they would not want to use a roster spot for a guy who can just return punts. I mean, with some of the injuries they have, Zadarius Smith is banged up, Lucas Patrick's banged up. They're going to need to have a proper amount of backups and special teams guys. So I would say if they have a package of plays, if he picked the offense up pretty well this week, then we might see him. Then I think they could have him as a punt returner and Ervin as a kick returner.
Let's head over to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube right now for some of your questions. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate it today. Let's start with Antwine over on Facebook. Another injury-related question. Antwine wants to know, will Packers outside linebacker Zadarius Smith play this upcoming week? Smith is listed as questionable heading into the game. He did not practice today as he re-aggravated an ankle injury, presumably yesterday in practice. He popped up on the injury report yesterday, was only a limited participant. Smith has been dealing with this ankle injury situation for a better part of the season. He was on the injury report throughout the first half of the season, recently came off around week 8, and now he is back on. How confident are the Packers that Zadarius Smith can work through it this Sunday?
Well, it looked like he had shaken it finally. It had just dogged him all the way from training camp, and he was trying different cleats, different tape jobs, things like that, and it looked like they had finally solved it. But ankles, they're tender body parts, and they are easy to re-injure, and I'm sure it happened again. But I don't think it'll mean he won't play. I think he'll play. I think he's always going to play through an injury like that. He's a hard guy to sit down. What they might do is, cut back on his snaps. And, with Rashawn Gary playing the way he is, that probably wouldn't be a dumb idea. Maybe they even just use him on nickel situations, rushing up the middle and cut back. Now, it really depends how bad it is. They might have just given him Friday off to say, hey, just stay off it for 2 days, and, maybe you'll be back to normal on Sunday.
We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll let you know over on PackersNews.com if there are any updates tomorrow about Zadarius Smith's status. Thank you, Antwine, so much for your question. Let's take a question over, not really a question, a statement from Carlton over on Facebook. Carlton says that the Eagles ran the ball against the Pack last year. Yes, they did. They had 176 rushing yards last season. If you look at the breakdown between the personnel that had the big day on the ground, Jordan Howard had 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. Miles Sanders had 72 yards. Sanders is on the 53-man roster. Jordan Howard actually started the season with the Miami Dolphins, and guess what? Now he's back on the Philadelphia Eagles on the practice squad. It is possible that the Eagles could decide to elevate Howard to the active roster this weekend. How likely is it that the Eagles can have a similar rushing day this Sunday?
Well, first of all, they got to hand it off. They got to commit to handing it off. They are not running the ball much at all. I think they're like ranked fourth in fewest amount of carries this year. And, Miles Sanders, for as good as he is, he's averaging 5.6 yards per carry. He's averaging like 10 carries a game. And so I don't know what the situation is, why they're not running it. But if they want to get some yards against the Packers defense, they should line it up and run it, because, they did it last year and other teams have done it. And it's the way to really attack the Packers defense. You got to run the ball against them. And, they have not proved that they can just shut down the running game.
Thank you, Carlton, for your question. Let's go over to Steve on Facebook. Steve wants to know, will Packers fans see Tyler Ervin and Tavon Austin on the offense at the same time, on the field at the same time, to utilize their speed? Austin has played a similar role as Tyler Ervin does in this offense in his past in his career in the NFL. How likely is it that LaFleur would want to have Austin and Ervin in a special package on the field at the same time in the future?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's going to happen. It's not going to happen this Sunday, but it's going to happen at some point. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're lined up in the backfield, with Rodgers in the shotgun and they're on each side of him. And then they'll somehow move them around or do some kind of play action or whatever. But to have two guys like that, if they're confident in Tavon Austin and they feel like he can help them, absolutely. I mean, that the more wrinkles you can add in an offense, and Matt LaFleur has proved to be pretty good at adding wrinkles. And I definitely think they'll be on the field together at some point.
Speaking of a new Packers player, let's take a question from Frank over on Facebook. Frank wants to know, will a big man, he is certainly a big man, defensive lineman Anthony Rush help stop the Eagles' run game this upcoming weekend? Anthony Rush has only been on the roster for a week. He is listed at 6'4", 361 pounds. I did not misspeak. That is a real life human being, let alone a professional athlete. How likely is it that Rush is ready to play this weekend against the Eagles?
I would guess he'll be inactive. That's my prediction. Their defense is somewhat, I don't know if it's complicated, but there's a lot of different techniques and ways that they play that are specific to Mike Pettine's defense. There's a lot of stunts and things that he'd have to, get ready for. Who knows? I mean, we won't know until Sunday, but I would predict that he wouldn't be active, and maybe a game or two down the line when they find out what he can really do in practice. I mean, they've only had him for 3 days in practice, so I don't know if they want to give up a roster spot for a guy who's only going to play like 10 plays. But if they think he's better than Billy Wynn, or he can help in their run game, maybe we'll see him.
Rush, interestingly enough, spent 2019 with the Philadelphia Eagles. It's unlikely that he will start this upcoming weekend or even play this upcoming weekend. However, it's something we'll keep an eye on and let you know when we know. Thank you so much, Frank. We appreciate your question. Let's go over to Josh. Josh always has some great questions about 2021 free agency. Luckily, we have our cap expert, Tom Silverstein, on the show today. Josh wants to know, how much money will the Packers pay running back Aaron Jones? What will his contract look like? Josh, that is assuming that the Packers decide they want to extend Aaron Jones, who becomes a free agent in 2021. How likely is it that the Packers do decide to extend Aaron Jones?
I'm starting to wonder. The later it gets, the more I'm starting to wonder whether he's not in the budget for next year, that maybe they're feeling like A.J. Dillon is going to be their lead back. Now, I think they'd be kind of crazy, but, certain people believe, certain general managers believe running backs are easy to get and that you don't pay a lot of money for them. Brian Gutekunst really hasn't been in the position to pay a running back. Ted Thompson didn't really pay running backs. So, I'm starting to have my doubts as to whether they're going to bring him back. I mean, he's a huge part of their offense, but he hasn't been used a lot lately. And, the way they've spent money on Bakhtiari and Clark, I don't know. I'm starting to, like I said, I'm having my doubts.
If the Packers don't decide to extend Jones, how much money is he going to run on the open market?
Well, here's the other thing the Packers could do is let him go to market and, be in the running, see whether they can get him at, a price that's more reasonable than if they do it now. Maybe his market won't be that as great as people think. And then maybe they get in the running to get him back. It's so hard to tell with running backs. The market was really depressed for a while. Now all of a sudden, you saw Kamara and Dalvin Cook sign big deals, but you find running backs in every draft, and so it's really, with the cap being down next year, maybe they're just going to play it out.
We'll keep an eye on that. It's certainly going to be an interesting storyline heading into this offseason, Josh. We appreciate your questions as always. Let's take a question over on Periscope from our friend Smumster. They ask, do the Packers need to score 27 or more points to win this game? The Eagles' defense is for real. The Packers have been averaging 31.7 points per game this season. They lead the NFL in that category. How many points do the Packers need to score this upcoming weekend, especially to outpace the struggling Eagles offense?
Well, I predicted they would score 27 points, but you'll have to buy paper or subscribe to find out what I predicted the Eagles will score. I think it will be tough. I think, what really will kind of determine the outcome is whether Philadelphia's offense shows up. If Philadelphia's offense can do anything, then it could be a tight game. But if they're turning the ball over and they're punting, at 3 and out, then the Packers will roll it up, because you can't stop them forever. You can stop them for a little while, but eventually they're gonna move the ball. And so again, I think it's really going to depend on how Philadelphia's offense performs.
Thanks, Mumster, for the question. Let's throw it over to Levi on Facebook. Levi wants to know who will cover tight end Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert this upcoming weekend. Who is going to assume the burden of these big athletic tight ends on the Packers defense?
I think they might cover them with a corner. I think they could. They used Will Redmond to cover Jimmy Graham a little bit against the Bears. They could do that. They could use Chandon Sullivan. It's a little bit of a mismatch from a size standpoint, but maybe they just treat him like a wide receiver. The problem with that is if Ertz lines up in line, then all of a sudden you're in nickel and they're in the base defense, and they're going to run the ball down your throat like Chicago. That's exactly what happened on that 57-yard David Montgomery run last week. The Packers were in nickel, and the Bears had Jimmy Graham in, and they just ran it right down their throat. So that's a good question. I would not be surprised if Redmond plays a little bit more, because he's a little bigger than Sullivan, and he's a good straight line speed guy, and it might turn out to be that way.
Thank you, Levi, for your question. We'll take a question from YouTube now. John wants to know, do we know? Very passionate, John, all caps. Next home game, which would be this upcoming weekend against the Eagles, how many fans will get to go in and watch? This past weekend against the Bears, the Packers allowed roughly 300 friends and family members of employees of the Packers into the stadium. That was the grand total. It's certainly, I don't know if it felt like 300 in the stadium.
No, I don't think it was. I would bet it was less than 200. That was my gut feeling. But, who wanted to, they didn't want to sit out in the stands and freeze, but yeah, I guess they are doing that again this year or this week. I think it's kind of for show. Or it's just in case there's some kind of miracle and COVID goes away. Uh, but it's not going to happen. They're not going to bring back fans. It's just too risky. They shouldn't do that to their fans. It would be a PR nightmare. Um, and I can't see them allowing fans at all the rest of the year.
With the fans returning in some capacity this past weekend, the in-game entertainment also returned. So Roll Out the Barrel came back.
Yeah.
The beer bottle race on the Jumbotron came back. So there were some more game day-like elements. Perhaps it helped the players feel a little bit more like they were playing a game in front of fans.
Maybe they heard a couple of those people where, they were sitting in primo seats on the 50-yard line. So, maybe a little bit of screaming, they heard them.
Good views, no lines at the concession stands. It
Right.
sounds like a pretty good situation.
No waiting in the bathroom for the bathroom.
Yeah, to be one of the select fans in the stadiums. Well, everyone, that is going to do it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you're staying healthy and safe. Have a great weekend. For Tom Silverstein, I am Olivia Reiner. We will see you on Sunday.